A very warm welcome from Munich, Germany to today's meeting hosted by Ceramtech. It's my big pleasure to welcome all of you. My name is Dominik Pförringer, and I'm going to be guiding you through that wonderful evening with an incredible faculty gathered throughout 3 countries with amazing experience and amazing inspiration. Orthopedic surgeons as well as implantologists have over years fought the decision between what material to use, what has the best properties, how to develop the best implants, and how to avoid complications. Interestingly, it is claimed that a dentist introduced the best material to the orthopedic surgeons, while vice versa, an orthopedic surgeon has revolutionized the market for the dentists or the implantologists. We're facing similar complications and similar challenges in our everyday work. It is the choice of A type of implant, and B, the right material. It is about achieving the perfect interface between the implant and the live material, the bone material in most cases, and in avoiding long-term complications. The durability, the lifespan of an implant is very important, and in itself depends a lot on that interface and how it is implanted and how well it interacts with the body. So if any sort of life-preserving measures for certain parts of the body have not succeeded, then an implant is unavoidable, and that's the point where we need to get artificial material into the body, which we have to build in, where we need to create an interface, and where the interaction is all key. Today's seminar is under the title Orthopedics Meets Dentistry, a world free of metal implants. That's the big question of today. Will our world in implants be metal-free in the future, or will it not be? It is my pleasure to guide through today's evening. It is my honor to have you, the audience, here with us today. You can be interactive. It's not a one-sided show only, but you can join us. Join us at slido.com. #Ceramtech. You will see it right now, or scan the QR code, and you will be right on. You will be able to pose questions, which at the end of our discussion session will then be answered by our faculty. With that, it is my big pleasure to hand over to today's host, to Mr. Hadi Saleh, who is going to give his welcoming words to all of you. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Dominik. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hadi Saleh. I'm the CEO of Ceramtech. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this digital event where orthopedic meets dentistry. As a supplier of ceramic implant solutions for both disciplines, Ceramtech is proud to bring 3 highly respected experts, a material scientist, a dentist, and an orthodontist to the same virtual to discuss the idea of a world free of metal implants. I hope this look into the future is as exciting for you. Enjoy the special format. I hereby hand over to Dominik Pförringer, who will lead us through this evening. Dominik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your welcoming words. With that, I'm certain I have not promised too much. We have a truly international faculty, and with that we switch over to Rome, Italy, where we have Professor Piconi, who is a world-renowned specialist on implant materials. Interestingly enough, his first connection to the material of ceramics has been by research in nuclear energy, from what I understood, from where he has shifted into medicine. So with that, it is my big pleasure to have a wonderful discussion and get insights from Professor Piconi. Good evening to Rome.
Good evening to you and to all the panelists and to the audience. It's my pleasure to be here. So,
Professor Piconi, what was the main motivation and the main driver to introduce ceramics to the medical market, to the healthcare market?
Yeah, really, ceramics were introduced in the very first time as bone substitutes. And also alumina was introduced as a bone substitute in the beginning. The real interest for its application in load-bearing application like dental implants or hip joints was due to the supposed inertness of this material. So, and this was the very beginning of ceramics in medicine in the early 70s, I would say. So
Thank you, Professor Piconi, for that starting point. So basically, looking at that, any new transition, any new introduction never comes smooth and never comes without any friction, so to speak. So what were the biggest setbacks in that introduction of the new material?
well, the new material performed very well from the viewpoint of biocompatibility and the less, let's say, lack of reactions to the wear debris in joint replacement. And there were, however, some. This is especially in comparison with the metal on metal joints or the metal on polyethylene joints that were in clinical use on that time. But the real main drawback was due to the design and processing of some of the early materials that didn't obtain the expected performance. The device didn't obtain the expected performance in the clinical setting. So let's say that this indicated the way to improve the materials, to improve the whole processing of ceramics components for clinical applications.
Thank you for that insight on the potential downside in the beginning. Luckily enough, through modern technology, we've overcome most of these problems. But still, do you see that all doctors, be it orthopedics or implantologists, dentists, are they ready for ceramics yet? Or where do you still see skepticism and where does it come from?
Well, in orthopedics, we have, let's say that in hip replacement, there is a wide consensus, I would say, on the use of ceramic components. In my country, let's say, more than 80% of joint replacement comes with a ceramic ball head, coupled to ceramic or to polyethylene in the different joints. In implantology, there was a skepticism especially, let's say, for implantology, because in the early implants made out of stainless steel of cobalt chromium or the blade implants didn't have the expected clinical performance. And there was, let's say, sort of refusal by many dentists. Implantology, let's say, was started by Brånemark in the late 90s with titanium. Ceramic can, let's say, is very interesting today, and a lot of dentists are interested in this technology, especially young dentists, because the use of implants is, let's say, growing worldwide, and then the interest to metal-free application is growing.
And as a material specialist, what is your opinion? What is your take on ceramics, that very special substance?
Well, in orthopedics, ceramic for sure give the advantage of the, let's say, biological safety of biocompatibility of the ceramic, the material itself, and of the wear debris. Especially the new composite ceramics allow the design of innovative components application in knee on a new device, and Professor Cobb will talk about, I can imagine. In dentistry, there is room for application of ceramic, but I think that there is room also for material that go, let's say, beyond the present zirconias on the market. So I trust that there will be interesting development in the near future.
Interestingly enough, in both dentistry as well as orthopedics, around the time of the landing of humankind on the moon, ceramics was introduced. So in Switzerland, it was Sami Sandhaus who in around 1965 introduced it in dentistry, and at the same time, Professor Boutin and Professor Mittelmeier in the 70s started basically in orthopedics. However, we already see a strong penetration of ceramics in orthopedics, but we haven't seen the same accelerated pathway in dentistry. Why is there such a gap between the two disciplines?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy that on your question. I had the pleasure to meet Semi Sandow's and to exchange some words with him during the first Congress of Ceramic Implantology here in Italy 2 years ago. And he is, let's say, is a master for all us because he is the father of the first, let's say, dental device made out, medical device made out of ceramic. Your question is about the, let's say, penetration of ceramics in dentistry. Well, the question is linked to several parameters. The probably is linked to economic consideration. Not only because for sure the cost of an implant and the technology that is behind an implant is much more complex than, and the design is much more complex than with a titanium implant. So and let's say the aesthetical, although the aesthetical and let's say biological issue advantages that the ceramic implant bring in, let's say, are very significant and can, let's say, help the overall success of this kind of medical technology. But however, there are, let's say, is a system that we have to consider. And there are a lot of variables that are not strictly material related in selecting, let's say, a kind of implant on another one.
I think from the complexity of your answer, we already recognize that this is not a very easy subject to talk about, and that's why it's a big pleasure to have an expert as you, who has high experience in the field, and I'm already looking forward to that bright discussion that is going to come up towards the end, where we're going and if the world is going to be metal-free or not. So with that, I think we've had the perfect introduction to the subject of ceramics already. And with that, it is basically my big pleasure to hand over now to someone who is following the same profession as me of being an orthopedic surgeon, to Professor Cobb, who is today in London with us and who has developed throughout England. I understand that his formal education has happened in Oxford and Brighton, and he is now basically has his current action radius in and around London. And with that, it's my big pleasure to get his insights basically from the orthopedic field. So that is going to be exciting because, as we just said, the orthopedic surgeons have been a little bit earlier in the field than the dentists, and we're going to have the dentist and implantologist from Basel who's going to speak last. So Professor Cobb, this is your chance to basically get the nail into the right spot right now because you're the first one to talk. Very warm welcome to London at that point, Mr. Professor Cobb.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I wish we were all meeting in person.
We all hope that we're going to be able to meet in person very soon again. And with that, I'm going to have a little bit provocative of a first question to you. So one says that general health starts in the mouth. Maybe an interesting question to an orthopedic surgeon. How do you see that? What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a good surrogate for health. I don't think it's necessarily, for my particular world of arthroplasty, the strong link between dental health or oral health and joint replacements isn't really proven, I wouldn't say. I think it's for the heart valve surgeons, of course, particularly those mechanical heart valves, they really did need dental extractions. There really hasn't been the evidence to say that sort of approach is necessary. But I would say in our current world that the relationship between certainly dental implant health and orthopedic implant health is a very direct one. Of course, we're so far behind. We're always lagging behind the dentists. They're so far ahead of us in understanding the relationships between bone and artificial material, and quite how they manage to get artificial material to bond to maxillary bone in particular with bacteria everywhere. It's astonishing. So they're technically advanced on us, and their materials are their material preparation, I think, is advanced compared to the average orthopedic surgeon. But the microbiology in 2020, I would say, for orthopedic surgeons, our appreciation of the relevance of the microbiome, we're starting to understand it, but I don't think we have a direct relationship between oral health and joint health at the moment.
Thank you very much for that insight. But just to dive into it a little bit deeper for our audience, where do you see the direct relation between oral health, so be it caries or be it plaque, and the risk of encountering a periprosthetic infection? Where do you see that risk?
So the data isn't strong there. There have been a few papers over the years saying before you have a hip replacement, you should have a full dental extraction. The data simply isn't there for that. We are lucky, I think, that the intra-articular life is microbiologically sort of privileged. Bacteria in the bloodstream, by and large, don't get into the joint spaces. And so with well osteomechanically integrated devices, mercifully, prosthetic joint infection is very rare. But all of us, every single one of us, would rather our patients had excellent dental health. However, as I go back, there's strong data to say perfect dental health is an essential for arthroplasty. It's not quite there, I wouldn't say.
Right, so for all parents, you can still tell your kids to brush their teeth at least twice a day, even though they're very far away from having joint replacement, okay?
Yeah.
That is something we can be very sure of. Okay,
I think so.
So coming basically with the orthopedic surgeon from the dental part and from the mouth to where it's interesting for us, when did you personally first start using ceramics as a joint replacement material, and what convinced you basically?
Sure. And so back when I started doing joint replacement, if we start in 1991, when I finished my training, it was a bad place. It was a sad place in some ways, because although joint replacement, hip replacement was completely wonderful and transforming, the Charnley rules were you couldn't have a joint replacement if you wanted to be active. Sir John would say, no, you're not appropriate for my device, rightly, because he knew that people who wanted to take exercise would wear out those joints. And we know that osteoarthritis is actually caused by activity. So it's active people who wear out. So we had this wonderful ability to do operations. The risks of surgery were less. But until the ceramics came along, we were having to be either cautious and say, please go away, come back when you really can't bear it any longer, or we were doing things to people that caused huge amounts of osteolysis from the wear rate of metal on plastic bearings, and then the awful compound errors of complicated revision surgery. So really, when I, as a young consultant, spending my training, seeing these fairly disastrous, huge osteolytic holes in the pelvis from wear rates, I vowed to start ceramics straight away, and really haven't looked. Since 1991, I did my first ceramic on ceramic hip replacement. And I sort of vowed I would really avoid those awful destructive things and set the patients free to do as much as they like. So it really was a huge transformation for me from a cautious thing to a go and have fun.
Interesting enough, I think 1991, I was back then a schoolboy, but my father was an orthopedic surgeon. I also had the first implants in my hands sort of to play around. Of course, they were all steel because those were the old ones, which were then all slowly being replaced by those that you had to assemble yourself. So clearly, I think you've stated it before that the patient satisfaction and patient activity is what we get measured by in our success of operations. So would you say that patients are generally more satisfied with their ceramic implant, and why so? Or if not, what are the limitations from your perspective?
So the major transformation has been able to say to people, go and have fun. So until now, until the ceramic bearings came along, one had to say to people, just take it easy. And there was this sort of background slight guilt. If I'm going out and playing tennis or having fun, I'm wearing out my hip and it will fail. And so there was this little tinge of depression because you were using up a resource and that perhaps you should keep that money in the bank and not spend it. Whereas we know with ceramic bearings, we can't measure the wear rate. So it's a completely different approach to arthroplasty if you know you can use it as much as you like.
So basically with that, it's limitless activity. So a strong pro-ceramics speech that you're giving there. Very positive for all patients who have a ceramics implant or who are receiving one. So tell us, you've recently, I heard, introduced a special Cobb implant that is mimicking the anatomy of the patient that gets the replacement. Tell us a little bit about that, and would that be possible with metal? And what are the advantages for the patient?
So, this is a really exciting project. It's called H1. It's still a trial. It's not a product. It's a clinical trial, but it's a trial of a resurfacing. So instead of putting a big metal post inside the femur, which will osseointegrate, and with a dental implantologist, it's the same deal, getting that metal to osseointegrate. But with a post inside your femur, you can have a bearing that lasts forever, but you've got a post inside your femur. And having a stiff metal rod down a golf club, it doesn't feel the same as a normal golf club. And having a stiff metal rod down your femur, the flex, the elasticity of the femur is not the same. And so people with a hip replacement are happy, but they don't run, or if they do run, they limp a little bit. So with resurfacing, you keep the flexibility in the femur. And that technology has been around for a while in metal-on-metal bearings. The problems of metal-on-metal bearings are the shedding of cobalt and chromium ions, which with some devices have been a really big deal. So for some years now, we've been working with Ceramtech to develop a ceramic-on-ceramic resurfacing. Of course, we're not the first to try this. It was all done before in the 80s, but without the coatings of today. And we mercifully, wonderfully, excitingly, now we've done 110 cases. I already on the 110th this morning with a ceramic resurfacing device, which, as you say, has the contours, the anatomic contours of the hip joint and the very superior tribology of a ceramic-on-ceramic bearing. So it seems like a really exciting combination. Technically difficult to make in ceramic, of course, but it's going very well.
Thank you. So from your excitement for ceramics, I appreciate your fascination and the positive encounter. And I assume that you're playing golf with a ceramic golf ball, of course, huh? So with that, we'll lead over from materials via orthopedics into dentistry. To call him a dentist would by far underestimate of who we're talking to today. And it's my pleasure to, as last but certainly not least, introduce Professor Jens Fischer, who is here from Basel today. He started out in dentistry, but he has also worked as the R&D director for a dental implant company for some years and is now back, and he's, from what I understand now, dedicating his research as well as his teaching activity to material science and has a lot of experience in dentistry, basically, and of course with novel materials. It's a big pleasure to have you here from Basel today.
Hello, good evening together. I'm happy to join the discussion. Yeah.
So the osseointegration of titanium has certainly posed a revolution to dentistry. How do you see that in relation to ceramics?
Well, the osseointegration of titanium, that's mainly due to the oxide layer on the surface of titanium. It's the passivated layer. And we have then a direct contact between the bone and the implant surface. On the other hand, this means a low corrosion rate, of course, but titanium is still a metal. And that means metals are corrosion prone, and therefore we know by a lot of literature that also titanium is corroding. And that means if we switch from titanium to zirconia, for instance, or to other ceramics, then we have significantly less corrosion rate, or nearly no corrosion. And that's one advantage, because we then have a higher biocompatibility. Another factor is, of course, that ceramics are tooth colored, and the patient loves that, of course.
Wonderful, the color aspect. So we've talked earlier about fashion aspects, and interestingly enough, we've seen watches going from titanium, and the most modern and hip watches are also made from ceramics nowadays. So we see a lot of development, and interestingly enough, we see orthopedic surgeons and dentists did what watchmakers are doing only now, some 30 years ago. So we see we've always been sort of on the forefront of innovation. Good to see that. So, Professor Fischer, tell me, when did you start experimenting with ceramics, and was there a breakthrough moment where you said, oh, wow, we've done something really fascinatingly new?
Well, I worked with ceramics during my whole professional life, especially with ceramic implants. I started in 2008, and breakthrough for these implants was when I received the one-year results of our clinical study. I didn't believe that these results would be possible. We are measuring the marginal bone level, and we look for the bone loss around the implant. And of course, in the beginning, we always lose a bone due to the surgery. But for the implant we tested, after 1 year, we had a loss of 0.7 millimeters. That's nearly nothing. And this was stable over now 7.5 years. That means we do not lose any bone around the ceramic implants. And that's a real success for me.
So it's basically all about the interface, and that's the interesting part. So tell us, from a design perspective, what's the main difference between a metal and a ceramic implant?
Well, you all know that ceramics are brittle and metals are ductile. And that means we have to look for a ceramic design, which means we have to avoid any edges, sharp edges. We have to look for radii, and that's a different to metals. And of course, it's quite difficult to fabricate small parts, such as small screws, something like that. That's a real challenge for the companies, and you have to be very sophisticated in the production process to know how to do that.
Okay, thank you. And how do you explain then, all of a sudden, the new interest and the fascination and the trend towards ceramics? Is that a hype? Is it en vogue right now, or is that going to be the only future?
I don't think it's a hype. It's a trend. We will have more ceramics in dentistry. One point is that patients do not want to have metals anymore. Second point is aesthetics is more important in dentistry now than compared to the 80s and 90s last century. And you can't do any aesthetic restoration with metals. You need tooth-colored materials, and there you have only resins and ceramics. And of course, ceramics are more biocompatible, and that's the reason why the people ask for ceramics. And I believe this is the trend, and it will increase and increase in the future. And it's not only a hype; it's not a hype.
When I'm thinking back in history, I always think of James Bond movies where I saw Jaws with all that metal in his mouth, and we see it's historical. It's not nowadays. It is back from the past, like a lot of things. We like to look at it in the past, like I used to play around with those titanium implants, titanium only, and nowadays I think we've seen a new trend. So do you see a paradigm shift? Is it going to be that metal disappears completely on the surface, like amalgam has disappeared at one point because we knew and we got to know a lot about the reactions of the immune system of the patients? Do you think that is going to happen, that they disappear completely?
I think it will not completely disappear because in some restorations we need metals. We need metals, for instance, for partial dentures. It's very difficult to make them without any metals. But for fixed restorations, for the implantology, for the fillings, yes, metals will vanish, and we will completely metal-free. We will have completely metal-free restorations, of course. Yeah, that's my opinion. And I think with amalgam, that was a paradigm shift, which I would say took place overnight. People were they feared that mercury would do any harm to them, and so the amalgam was replaced by resin composites, and these resin composites had to be developed very fast because there was a pressure from the market, and not only the dentists but the industry was not prepared for that. And therefore, I believe concerning the replacement of titanium implants by zirconia implants is an important step which we have to start today. We have to be prepared when the market changes and when the patients more and more want to have these zirconia implants. That's our duty and that's our responsibility at the universities as well as in the industry.
Thank you. I think we've tackled the topic now from three directions, and we're really a little bit more knowledgeable than we used to be when we started out. At least I've learned a lot, being mainly from the orthopedic direction, interested in the subject from the very first point. Now I've broadened my horizon in that sense, and it was a big pleasure to hear all three of your opinions on that. As a German, we all need to be very much in discipline, so we have an almost military-like operations plan, and I would like to first take this moment that we have to thank all speakers for sticking to the time frame so very, very well. That always makes the moderator happy if you're on time. And in order not to change that, I would like to now take the opportunity to basically jump into the next part of the session, into the panel discussion, where all three of our wonderful experts have the chance to basically share their experience and also potentially get into a little bit of a discussion before we then can answer the questions that the audience might have. So back in the old days, I think we were a little bit more lightheaded or careless in implants, and a lot of things were implanted where we only afterwards knew and understood what was happening. Right now we're in a situation where the European Union is even thinking about banning cobalt chromium combinations because of their toxicity and their cancerogenous potential. Are we overreacting a little bit? Or are we now just understanding the problems? And is the patient of today different? How would you see that? And the question is purposely addressed to all three of you in whichever way you would like to grasp it.
Yeah.
Yes,
I would say, yeah.
Professor Fischer.
Yeah, okay. in my opinion, the patients are more sensible in two ways. It's a psychological sensibility, I would say, and patients suffer more from foreign materials, exogen materials, and therefore there is a stronger pressure on the immune system. And for that reason, I think we have to look to less corrosion-prone materials, and that's the idea we have in dentistry.
I think Professor Cobb wanted to add.
So from my perspective, nickel seems to be the real problem, not really cobalt and chromium. Not practically speaking, even with high metal ion levels, cobalt and chromium toxicity is unbelievably rare. But nickel sensitivity is a really big issue, and with people being tattooed, I don't know whether it's true in Germany and Italy, but tattooing and nickel sensitivity seem to be increasing those phenomena. So I think there's the whole metal sensitivity area, which and cobalt chrome alloy, of course, has nickel in it. The other domain is the material property. That while cobalt chrome is very stiff, like ceramic, titanium is a really interesting material, and you can get stiffness with modern manufacturing. You can get stiffness that you need. And the thing, ceramic is a wonderful material for tribology, but for osteocompatibility in terms of stiffness, it's very, very stiff. And so I think we're still going to need titanium in some circumstances.
Professor Piconi, he's shaking his head
Yeah.
and he's raising his finger like a teacher to me. So,
Yeah, I think my point of view is that it's not only a question of materials, it's a question of the whole production process of a medical device. There is evidence, especially in dental implants, that are, I would say, low-cost devices. Well, many of dental implants are low-cost devices. And there is evidence of contamination of the surface from residuals of the, let's say, fluids or used during the production. And in some cases, this, for sure, this can lead, let's say, the key point, in my viewpoint, in medical device is the cleaning step of the device. Not only the sterility, but the cleaning after production. This is one very important point. And at the end of the day, this point is very, very, very little analyzed in the scientific literature, taking into account, in the case of failure of everything is passed as a reaction to metals, but I think that we have to go a bit deeper in that. Second, the question about, because we have time to discuss, but I think this is the key point in my view. I stop here. Okay. Other questions?
no, but please, if you still have a point to make on that, please. We don't want to cut you off. You've been so disciplined in the beginning.
Is the other point is that the reaction to they say that the patient has changed because the environment we were living is changing. Has changed a lot since the 60s in terms of pollution, and that's the reason why some patients will be more sensitive to some aspect of the implant surface.
Three gentlemen, I think three rather similar explanations that there is room for improvement, but that we haven't done everything right in the past. And I think that's always important to understand sort of where we're coming from, where we're going to. With that, I basically have a question that is of concern to myself as well. So with modern materials like BIOLOX and DENSILOX, we have already reached a high level of innovation and a high material performance. Are we at the peak of this development already, or is there still much room for improvement? Because humankind is always curious to go, sort of even go one step further. What's your take on that one? Professor Cobb, yes.
Speaking for me, for ball joints, for simple, fully congruent spherical joints, the barrier to a new material when you have a BIOLOX delta on delta, it's good enough. I wouldn't personally invest in someone who said, I've got a new bearing couple that's going to do better than that. So for hard-on-hard bearings, which are fully congruent, it's really good. For most joints are more complicated than that. And so we can't use a delta-on-delta bearing in most of the, in the jaw, in the ankle, in the knee. You can't use a delta-on-delta bearing. And so you're talking delta on polyethylene, so hard on soft bearing. And that combination hasn't yet fully evolved. I wouldn't say it's good, but there's I think there's still an opportunity for optimizing that relationship, just purely tribologically. And then, of course, for all of us, we're also interested in the structural integrity of something rather than just the tribological interface. And for us at the moment, our only choice is a titanium or a titanium and hydroxyapatite interface between the ceramic and the host bone. So we haven't yet, the tribological surface is pretty good. It's the bone integration surface we've still got some opportunities for, I'd say.
So with that, you're basically leading me to my next question, which is about the bone integration. I mean, in the past, sort of, it was thought impossible that there will be an osteointegration of the ceramics directly. So basically we see that the surface is made out of it, and as we've seen in the movie in the beginning, the implant is still being hedged by something else and it's being held by something else. However, in dental implantology, we see a bone ceramic interface that works quite well. And right now, from what I understood, the H1 resurfacing is coated with titanium. But do you see a future in basically bone to ceramics interface directly also in orthopedics?
Absolutely. I completely see it. The only problem is the regulatory environment. That when I talk to my friends who are older, who were doing device development 20 or 30 years ago, you could invent something and put it into patients pretty much straight away. It's such a long process now. It's not the discovery and the invention and the biological testing, but the regulatory path from here to there.
I agree with Professor Cobb. We demonstrated the integration of the osseointegration of zirconia in the jaws of the maxillary bones of beagles since 1993, and that's okay. But today, the day of today, to find out a different, let's say, application in a medical device is, let's say, has to fight, has to dodge the barrier posed by the new regulatory system, and this is a very, very, very tough wall to be passed or to be overcame.
Yes, Professor Fischer, please.
Yeah. In dental implants, we have a micro-rough surface. Which surface do you use with the orthopedic implants? Is it also micro-roughened, means sandblasted edged as we do?
We just our device is green machined, and then plasma spray titanium. Yeah, so we plasma spray titanium straight onto it. I mean, of course, that bond is a fantastic bond. It's very strong. The shear fatigue testing and the pull-off testing shows that the titanium is bonded beautifully onto ceramic, but it is a titanium layer. it's not ceramic, it's titanium.
So looking into the future, I hope that if we continue this conversation next year, maybe in person again, at least that the panelists are sitting together because it's allowed and possible again. We hope that we're then seeing basically bone and ceramics only, which would be the perfect setup, I think, from what I understand from the three of you from the answer to the last question. But to help us understand, in orthopedics, clearly ceramic surfaces have outrun their metal brothers. And in dentistry, it still seems to be limited by economic measurements. So health economics don't seem to allow for that. I think maybe Professor Fischer, do you have an understanding on that, or do you have an outlook on that? How is that going to develop in the future from your point of view?
Yeah, from an economical point of view, of course, currently the zirconia implants, they are expensive. But we have production processes which can be used, for instance, injection molding. Then these devices will be much more less expensive. And from that viewpoint, I think it should be possible to have a larger use of these materials, of these implants. It depends on the insurance of the countries. In Switzerland, for instance, the patient pays for it, and then it's his decision. In Germany, it's quite different. And therefore, we have to look to each country how it is managed. But I think with injection molding or other cheap production processes, it will be able to be competitive with these devices.
Thank you for that answer from the perspective of dentistry. Now we're seeing and we're talking about all these advantages basically that we're seeing in terms of ceramics. Are we ready yet for a metal-free world? Is that going to be the future, or is there still something standing in between us and this future? And I would like to get your quick insight, because I already see that there is there's audience questions awaiting us. So are we ready for a metal-free world?
Well, for me, I would say tribologically we are, but economically we aren't. And if you look at, as Jens just mentioned, mainly in my world, the patient is not allowed to choose, to co-pay, to say, I want ceramic. Mainly, those choices are made for them, either by an insurance company or a government, or even in Manhattan at special surgery, the patient doesn't get to choose. It's a funny way. In dentistry in the UK, the patient definitely is a customer. Weirdly, in implant choice in Germany, the patient does not get to choose their implant. So I think we have to evolve societally. We have to evolve a little bit.
I'm just being told we still have a little bit of time to discuss that question. So Professor Piconi, please.
Yes, in Italy too, the patients pay directly the dental cares. And then the key point for the development of the application of ceramics in dentistry lies in the technology of dental implant. Professor Fischer was talking about injection molding. I would say also optimize the feedstock, reduction of wastage, and optimizing the whole production process to decrease the cost of production of dental implants. The ceramic dental implant in the next 10 years will never have the same production cost of a titanium dental implant. But let's say we all are working to decrease the today production cost and bring it at the same order of magnitude. In such a way, also the, let's say, price to the market can be decreased. But I don't know how much in this moment.
And Professor Fischer, from your point of view, metal-free world, is it in front of the door?
We are partially ready to use ceramics instead of metals. I mentioned before, For partial dentures, it's not possible currently. For fixed prosthodontics, we have zirconia frameworks veneered with ceramic. For fillings, we have feldspar ceramics. And now for implants, we are in the beginning to change from titanium to zirconia. But I think it will take several years, the switch. It's not an overnight switch. Yeah. So we are partially ready, I would say.
To basically at the doorstep into a new world, basically led by ceramics. So with that, I thank you basically for the static discussion that we've had, and now we're going into the dynamic part of it, and we still have a lot of minutes left, thanks to your discipline once again. And the first question is there a relation between biofilm and wear particles? And I think when that question popped up, Professor Cobb was already nodding, and I think he read it. I hope I've interpreted his face right. So with that, I would like to address that question to him.
I don't think they are directly related. The biofilm of bacterial adhesion classically onto bits of bare metal, stainless steel or cobalt chrome or polyethylene, is not really related to the wear particles. I believe the reason that the ceramic is so resistant to biofilm is its low surface energy. It's not really to do with its wear characteristics, but I'm an orthopedic surgeon. People don't ask me questions like that. or they don't listen to my answers anyway.
Well, as I always say, we're the carpenters of medicine, we're the brutal guys, yes. But
That's
I
right.
think you've proven throughout the entire discussion that your scientific background is at least as good as your implant background is as a carpenter of medicine. So with that, I think we can jump into a more dental-related question, which reads, could the lack of acceleration on the use of ceramics in dentistry be multifactorial, perhaps a lack of publicly available clinical outcomes data like a registry, for example? I'll give Professor Fischer a second to read it again.
Could you repeat the question?
So basically, if I may rephrase it from my point of view, the not so rapid appreciation of, now it's vanished. All right.
Yeah, I didn't.
Could that be due to the lack of data? Are we not seeing enough data? That's basically the question. So that we're not seeing the acceleration due to a lack of data. Is that the part that we're missing?
Okay, that's right. We lack data in clinical performance of the ceramic implants. There are 3 or 4 long-running clinical studies with quite good results. I mentioned it before, but that's not enough, of course. And so we have to push clinical studies with ceramic implants so that the dentists, they can rely on that and that they believe that these implants work at least as well as titanium. Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm.
May I?
Sure, Professor Piconi, please.
Yeah. The point is that we are talking since several years in the, let's say, scientific community about a register of dental implants. But it's very difficult to get to set up this kind of register due to the distribution of dental implant that is is made on a private basis. It's very difficult to have a follow up like the one that you have in a big hospital. Moreover, let's say you have to follow all the patients. Each dentist has to follow his patient within his private practice, and this is very much complicated because you have to organize a data collection system very much punctual, I would say, and it's very difficult to obtain a significant number of reports with significant data to set up a register. You may have, let's say, follow-up studies, multi-center randomized studies, but very few there are on dental implants so far. In ceramic dental implant, moreover.
And just not to underestimate the difficulties of registries, that when the implant retrieval centers report results, they find that many of the retrievals are not actually classed as failures in the registry. So there's a huge bias against reporting bad results in registries. So it's quite complicated, and it requires almost sort of state control. It's to get really good registry data is very, very hard.
And that's the reason why we need controlled clinical studies.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the real way.
And I think what we're doing here on a micro level is what needs to be done on a macro level as well. People need to talk to each other, learn from each other, and have a discussion. And when I look at my general field of research, digital health, I see also technicians need to talk to doctors and the other way around. Otherwise, they will not develop something that is suitable for the market and technologically feasible. So I'm glad we're having this sort of panel that we're having today. So as another question, I'm reading dual mobility is a hot topic right now. However, some may be interested using a ceramic head but a metal liner. Would you discourage this? And if so, why?
So I agree, dual mobility is a very interesting area. Honestly, it's an experiment still, because the current, mainly they're cobalt chrome shells, or weirdly, they're titanium shells with a cobalt chrome titanium taper, and then a polyethylene liner with a ceramic ball inside that, with a titanium taper inside that. So that's a very complicated cell at worst. So I'm apprehensive about the big adoption of that very complicated technology, but a ceramic shell, a ceramic acetabular component with a dual mobility, with a polyethylene interposition will be fine. That would be fine.
Thank you. Now we're approaching, unfortunately, relatively rapidly the end of our discussion, but there is still one question that says, for Professor Fischer, maybe if you can briefly answer it, is ceramic better for the soft tissue interface as well as the bone interface? And how important is that for aesthetics? And I would ask you to be very brief.
Yes. We know from clinical studies that the inflammation around zirconia during the healing process is less than around titanium. The observation is that the healing process is very fast around zirconia, and the attachment of the soft tissue, means the sealing against bacteria, is very tight, and therefore we have in the bone and on the level of the soft tissue very good contact between the tissue and the material, and that's, I believe, one of the reasons we do not lose any bone.
Thank you for that brief answer. Now I'm seeing a very general question, which I think is almost philosophical, which is wonderful for the end. And I would ask all three panelists to basically try and answer it in one sentence, because it states, what's your advice for your young colleagues at the beginning of their career? And I think we can start with Professor Piconi, because he started out the first round, and then we'll go around. And again, please be brief.
Specialize in, let's say, chemistry and chemistry of ceramic materials, because there is a lot of job to be done, and you have to continue what we started several years ago. And that's my, my suggestion.
Thank you. We're seeing the passion in your eyes. So, Professor Cobb, from your point of view, the one sentence for the young colleagues.
I guess look for a big problem. Look for the big problems and have a go at them.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Professor Fischer, what's your one sentence for the young colleagues?
Only two words: think ceramics.
Great. How could one end such a wonderful discussion better? I think I see smiling faces on all three sides, in Rome, in London, and in Basel. You have another smiling face that you've created in Bavaria and Munich right now. It was a wonderful experience for me. It was inspiring in how you answered the question, and it was teaching in the content. At the same time, it was at no point ever boring. If only my university would have been like that, I would have loved it. So it is great. I think ceramics is the sentence that we can take as a take-home message for everybody. I would also like to thank the host again for allowing all of this, for Ceramtech to make this possible, to allow for such an exchange without interfering in the contents of what was said, but basically just to give the field, the ground field, for the perfect organization, for the perfect orchestration and the technological setup. It has been a big pleasure, and I already look forward to the next session that we'll have together with all those three wonderful professors. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.